Should have known something was off the moment her older brother looked at me across the kitchen island and said, "Oh, so you're him." Not with hostility. Worse, with recognition. Like he'd been briefed. Her name was Nora, and for 5 years she had been my best friend, the person I texted before I texted anyone else. And, if I was being completely honest with myself, which I had been carefully avoiding, the reason every other person I dated felt like a rough draft. We met in our second year at UBC. I was in the campus bookstore holding a used copy of a sociology textbook I absolutely did not need for any course I was taking, and she was standing beside me in the same aisle doing the exact same thing with a calculus book she had no business owning. I said something like, "Are you also just buying things for the aesthetic?" She said, "Worse. I'm buying it because the cover is orange and I'm going through something." I laughed out loud in the middle of the bookstore. She didn't even smile. Just tucked it under her arm and walked to the cash. That was Nora, deadpan and warm at the same time. The kind of person who said exactly what she was thinking, but gently enough that it always landed right. We ended up in line together, argued about whether the self-checkout was faster. It was not, and somehow walked out the same direction. By the time we reached the bus loop, I already knew she grew up in Kelowna, had 2 older brothers, was studying environmental science, and thought Tim Horton's dark roast was a personality disorder. After that, we kept running into each other. Then we started arranging to. Then it became a thing. Study sessions in the library basement, walks around the seawall when either of us needed to think out loud, late Thursday nights at that full place on Robson that stayed open until midnight. She became the first person I wanted to call when something happened. Good things, bad things, embarrassing things that didn't need to leave the conversation. If something genuinely funny happened to me and I couldn't tell Nora about it within the hour, it didn't feel fully real yet. Everyone around us had opinions about this naturally. My roommate at the time watched us spend 45 minutes debating whether Vancouver Island counted as the interior and said, "I want you both to really think about what you're doing." We did not think about it. That was the habit, the comfortable, very functional habit of not examining the thing directly. I came close more than once. There was a night we were sitting on the roof of my building in Kitsilano, both wrapped in jackets, because October in Vancouver has opinions, and she was talking about wanting to do her master's in environmental policy, and I was watching her talk and thinking, very clearly, I don't want this to ever stop. And then I folded that thought up, put it somewhere responsible, and said, "You should apply to Dalhousie. They have a good program." Because Nora was the most stable and good thing in my life, and I had no interest in asking a question that might crack the foundation. So I did what I always did instead. I showed up, I was reliable, I was her person without naming what kind of person I was. Which is how I ended up driving 2 hours from Vancouver to her parents' place in Kelowna on the long weekend in August. A box of Purdy's chocolates on the passenger seat and a duffel bag in the back because her younger brother Owen was turning 19 and the family was doing a whole thing. Nora had texted me that morning, "Please come early. I cannot deal with setup alone. Last year I did the entire back deck by myself and I've never fully recovered." So I came early. She opened the door in a paint-stained t-shirt with a piece of masking tape stuck to her forearm and what appeared to be a string of outdoor lights wrapped around her shoulders like the world's worst cape. "You're almost late," she said. "I'm 20 minutes early." "You should have been here an hour ago." "You didn't ask me to be here an hour ago." She handed me one end of the lights and turned back toward the backyard. "I'm asking now, retroactively." I followed her through the house. The Kelowna house smell of cedar and sunscreen and something always baking, and out onto the back deck, which had a view of the lake in the distance and was currently in a state that suggested someone had started 4 projects and completed 0. Nora was already moving, untangling extension cords with the focused energy of someone who had accepted chaos as her natural environment. She was wearing cut-off shorts and the old t-shirt, hair pulled up in a knot with strands already coming loose around her face. She looked like she always looked in that house, completely in her element and completely exhausting to keep up with. I had been not examining this for years. We spent the next hour doing the deck, stringing lights along the railings, dragging out the folding tables her dad kept stacked in the shed, arguing about whether the cooler should go on the left or right side of the steps. She said left. I said right. We compromised and put it on the left. She didn't gloat, which honestly was worse. Her mom, Carol, came out around noon with a plate of cut watermelon and the easy smile of a woman who had been quietly watching things unfold for longer than anyone knew. She had met me a handful of times over the years. She liked me the way parents like someone when they've already decided something, which I appreciated in theory and found faintly alarming in practice. "You made it," she said, setting the watermelon down. "I was summoned," I said. Carol smiled. "You always come when she asks." "He owns a car," Nora said, not looking up from the cord she was untangling. "It's not that deep." Her mom said in a tone that meant something entirely different. I didn't catch it. Or I caught it and filed it under things I was not going to inspect. By 4 o'clock, the backyard looked like a real party. Lights up, tables set, music coming through the portable speaker Nora had mounted on the railing with what I was fairly sure was a bungee cord and good intentions. Owen arrived with a group of his friends, all of them 19 and acting like it, immediately taking over the lawn with some kind of yard game that involved throwing things and yelling. Nora's older brother James showed up with his girlfriend. Her dad came in from wherever dads go before parties and immediately started talking about the propane situation with anyone who would listen. I was carrying bags of ice from the garage when James passed me in the kitchen, glanced at me the way I mentioned, and said, "Oh, so you're him." I said, "I'm pretty sure I've met you before." He said, "I know. That's not what I meant." Then he grabbed a beer from the fridge and walked outside like that was a complete thought. I stood in the kitchen for a second, holding 2 bags of ice, trying to figure out what he meant. Then I decided I'd figure it out later and went back outside. About an hour into the party, I was standing near the cooler talking to one of Owen's friends about nothing in particular when I heard Carol's voice carry over the general noise. "Nora, come here for a second. I want you to meet O and bring him with you. And bring him with you." Nora, who was standing near the table, looked at me. I looked at her. We walked over together to where Carol was standing near the edge of the deck with Nora's aunt from Penticton, who I had not met before, and who had the particular energy of someone who had been told a lot of family gossip and was very pleased about it. Carol looked at me with the expression of someone who had been waiting, with great patience, for a specific moment to arrive. Then she said to her sister, "This is the one Nora never shuts up about." Everything went quiet for me, not around me. The party kept going. Owen yelled something about the score. The speaker was playing something upbeat. But inside my own head, everything just stopped and rearranged. I turned and looked at Nora. She had gone the specific shade of red that comes from being truly, completely ambushed, not embarrassed pink. Actual red. Starting from the neck. "Mom," she said. Carol continued pleasantly, as if she had not just detonated something in her own backyard. "I know his coffee order, his sleep schedule, and the name of his childhood dog. She tells me things she doesn't even know she's telling me." "I will literally pay you to stop," Nora said. "She texts me after every time she sees you," Carol added, addressing me now with the calm of someone who had decided this was going to happen today. "Just to update me, like I'm her editor." Nora set down whatever she was holding. A paper plate, I think, with slightly too much force. "I need to go check on the food," she said, in a voice that was doing its absolute best. And then she walked across the deck and down the steps and around the corner of the house. I stood there. Nora's aunt made a sound that was approximately the noise someone makes when a TV show does exactly what they wanted it to do. Carol looked at me over the rim of her glass of white wine and her voice dropped into something quieter and more direct. "You should probably go talk to her." I was already setting down my drink. I found Nora around the side of the house near the garden beds her mom kept along the fence, standing with her arms crossed and her back mostly to me, looking at a row of tomato plants like they had failed to protect her. "Hey," I said. "I'm not in there," she said. "I know. You're out here." "Very helpful, thank you." She didn't turn around. I leaned against the fence. The noise of the party was muffled from here. Just music and the occasional shout from the lawn game around the other side. "She really texted your mom about me?" I said. That made her turn around. Nora looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen before. Not quite embarrassment anymore. Something more tired and more honest than that. Like she'd been carrying something for a long time and had just gotten caught putting it down. "That was a terrible first question," she said. "I'm trying to figure out where to start." "Start somewhere less smug." "I'm not being smug. You look like you're doing math." That was fair. I was doing math in a way. I was running back through 5 years of things that suddenly looked different than they had that morning. The way she always knew when I was stressed before I said it. The way she went slightly quieter when I mentioned someone I'd been seeing. The way she drove 40 minutes across the city last February in a snowstorm. Not a serious Vancouver snowstorm, but still. Because I'd had a genuinely terrible week, and she said I sounded like I needed the good ramen place, not the okay ramen place. The way I had always explained all of that as just, that's how Nora is. The way I had been so committed to that explanation. I pushed off the fence and took a couple steps closer. Nora. She looked at me, arms still folded, face still flushed, waiting. I'm not surprised, I said. She blinked. What? That's the thing. I'm not surprised by what your mom said. I think I'd done something for a long time and I just kept not letting myself get to the end of that sentence. She was very still. Why not? She said quietly. Because you were the best thing in my life that was definitely there, I said. And asking the question meant there was a version where it wasn't. She looked at me for a long second. The garden was quiet. A bee was doing something methodical in the tomato plants behind her. You know what the worst part is? She said. What? I'm standing in my mom's garden, in my paint shirt. She looked down at herself. This is not how I imagined this conversation. You imagine this conversation? She closed her eyes briefly. I walked right into that. Little bit. Despite everything, she almost smiled. Then she looked at me again, and the almost smile faded into something more real and more careful. How long have you known? Actually known. I thought about the honest answer, which was longer than I wanted to admit out loud. A while, I said. There was this night last winter, we were at that ramen place on Commercial, and you had this whole speech about wanting to move back to BC after your contract in Calgary ended. And I stopped. I felt relieved. And I didn't let myself look at why. Nora's expression changed in a way I didn't have a word for. Not surprised. Not thrilled yet. Something more careful than that. Like she'd learned not to count on things too early. I moved back, she said. I know, I helped you move boxes. And you said nothing. I didn't know how to say something without losing the version of this that I already had. I paused. That sounds worse out loud than it did in my head. It sounds accurate, she said, which is different. She unfolded her arms. Small thing, but I noticed it. How long for you? I asked. She looked at the fence for a second, then back at me. That's rude. Probably. The night you had the flat tire on the Coquihalla, she said. It was November. You called me from the side of the highway like I could somehow help from downtown Vancouver. But you called me first. Before roadside assistance. Before your brother. Me. She lifted one shoulder, and I drove to the kitchen and stood there for 10 minutes because I didn't know what to do with what that felt like. I stared at her. That was 3 years ago, I said. I'm aware of that, yes. Nora. I know. 3 years. I'm going to need you to stop saying it like that. I'm saying it like that because I wasted 3 years. She shook her head slightly, not quite agreeing. You didn't waste them. You were there for all of them. You just had the wrong label on it. That was so Nora that I almost laughed, correcting my framing in the middle of the most important conversation we'd ever had. Finding the more accurate version even then. I stepped closer, close enough that this was clearly going somewhere, and she wasn't stepping back. The ramen place, I said. Do you remember what you ordered? She looked at me like she couldn't tell if this was relevant. The tonkotsu. You always order the tonkatsu. I like the tonkatsu. I know you like the tonkatsu. I know you take the long way home when you're thinking through something. I know you stress clean, and the tell is that you rearrange things that don't need rearranging. I know you cry at those Canadian Heritage Minute commercials and claim it's ironic. I know you've had the same reusable bag from that Granville Island market for 4 years because you like the way it smells. I stopped. I know all of that. I've known it for years. I just kept filing it under friendship because that was the version I was sure I could keep. Nora looked at me for a long moment. The Heritage Minutes thing is genuinely ironic, she said. It really isn't. She laughed. Once. Short. A little helpless. Then she rubbed her face with one hand, and when she looked back up, she was smiling in the small and slightly undone way that was possibly the best thing I had ever seen. "You're telling me this in my mom's garden," she said. "You're the one who came to the garden." I was making an exit. Well, it didn't work. She looked at me. The garden was quiet. Somewhere around the other side of the house, Owen's friends erupted over something. The speaker switched to something slow. "So what happens now?" she said. Old me would have deflected, made a joke, kept the conversation 1 degree from the real thing. Instead, I said, "Now I stop treating the most important thing in my life like it needs to stay the same forever to stay good." She went quiet for a second. Then she said, "That might be the most you've ever said in a single sentence." "I've been saving up." She looked at me once more, like she was deciding something, or like she'd already decided and was just giving herself a second to believe it. And then she stepped forward and kissed me. It was warm and a little tentative for exactly 1 second, the way first things are when they've been a long time coming. And then it wasn't tentative at all. It felt like the end of a very long-held breath, like finally letting something true be true. When we stepped apart, Nora kept her eyes closed for a moment. Then she said, "My mom is going to be completely unbearable about this." "She already is. She's going to bring it up at every family dinner for the rest of our lives." Small price. She texted my aunt before we even went to the same university and said she had a feeling about a boy. I blinked. "That's not, you were 18. She's been farming this moment for 7 years. Nora looked at me. "Do you understand the monster we're going to walk back to?" "I understand she's also the person who told me to go find you." Nora opened her mouth, closed it. "That's annoyingly fair." I thought so. She looked toward the corner of the house, then back at me. Took one breath. "Okay, we go back out there. We act normal." "Completely normal," I agreed. "If she says anything, she's going to say something. If she says something, we just accept it." Nora gave me a look that was exhausted and fond and something new all at once. Then she straightened up, smoothed her t-shirt, and started walking toward the backyard. I fell into step beside her. We turned the corner. The party was where we'd left it. Owen mid-argument with someone about the rules of whatever they were playing. Nora's dad now addressing anyone in range about the secondary propane situation. James near the cooler looking at his phone. Carol was standing at the end of the deck with Nora's aunt. She saw us. She looked at our faces. Not quickly, carefully, and the expression that crossed hers was quiet and very satisfied. The expression of a woman who had been patient for a very long time and found patience to be entirely worth it. She said nothing. That was somehow more powerful than anything she could have said. Nora muttered, "She's been waiting years to make that face." I said, "She earned it." Nora bumped her shoulder against my arm in a way that was meant to be a rebuke and wasn't. James glanced up from his phone, took in the two of us, and said, finally in the same tone you use when a delayed flight eventually lands, just purely, logistically, at last. Owen, to his enormous credit, did not notice immediately. He was absorbed in the yard game crisis. His friends were 19 and deeply focused on things that mattered to them. That was fine. That felt right. Nora's dad looked over once, seemed to perform some kind of rapid calculation, shrugged in a way that communicated complete acceptance, and went back to his propane theories. We stood there in the backyard in the August light, the lake just visible beyond the rooftops, the string lights starting to glow as the sun dropped, and it all felt exactly the same as it always had, except that I had finally stopped pretending I didn't know what it was. A few months later, on Thanksgiving weekend, her family does theirs in October, proper Canadian timing. I was back in Kelowna sitting at the Bennett table, turkey in the middle, everyone talking over everyone the way they always did. Nora was across from me, and she had this small, quiet smile that she got when things were going well, and she was aware that they were going well, which was rarer than it should have been. Carol, from the end of the table, said to no one in particular, "I'm so glad everyone is here." And then she looked at me with a very small, very deliberate smile and said nothing else. Nora kicked me lightly under the table. I smiled into my water glass. That was the thing about finally getting the label right. Nothing about it felt new. It felt like the truest version of something that had always been there, just waiting for one of us to stop mislabeling it and call it what it was. I think about the moment Carol said it, out loud at a backyard party with her sister standing right there, and what strikes me now isn't the embarrassment of it. It's how long it took me to be ready to hear something that simple. I had every piece of information I needed. I knew Nora drove across the city in a snowstorm because I sounded low on the phone. I knew she went quiet when I mentioned someone I'd been seeing. I knew she called her mom after every time we spent time together, apparently, which in hindsight is not a casual friendship behavior. The information was never missing. What was missing was my willingness to be honest about what it meant, first with myself, and then with her. That's the thing about clarity. It doesn't always arrive like a revelation. Sometimes it arrives like Carol, holding a glass of wine, saying something out loud that everyone in the room already knew. What I had to do, what took embarrassingly long, was actually look at what I valued and choose it intentionally instead of just being near it. That's not a romantic failing. It's a human one. We protect what matters to us by refusing to risk it, and we tell ourselves that caution is the same as care. It isn't. Nora waited 3 years not because I didn't care, but because caring without honesty is just a quieter kind of avoidance. I think the real turning point wasn't the garden. It was the moment I stopped performing the easier version of things. There's something that takes actual courage in saying, I know what this is, I know what I want, and I'm going to say it plainly even though the answer could change everything. Not reckless courage. The kind that comes from having thought it through, understood the cost of staying quiet, and decided that honesty was worth more than comfort. That's what I finally had. Standing between the tomato plants in Kelowna, talking to someone I'd known for 5 years like I was meeting her at the same time. And Nora. What she had was something I genuinely respect. She carried what she felt for 3 years without making it anyone else's problem. She showed up, stayed present, remained exactly herself. That kind of patience isn't passivity. It's a quiet kind of integrity. She didn't push. She didn't perform. She just kept being honest in the way she knew how, and she trusted that the truth had a way of eventually getting through. What I took from all of it is something I try to hold on to now. The people worth keeping are the ones you can be truthful with, starting with being truthful about them to yourself. The rest follows when you stop mislabeling things out of fear and start calling them what they actually are. Carol knew that before either of us did. I'm not sure I'll ever fully forgive her for being right so early, but I'm glad she said it when she did.